Hi, this is Tamsen Granger.
This is Dan Abuhoff.
With Tamsen and Dan read the paper on Sunday, June 30th, last day of June, 2019.
That's right. And at the end of a harrowing week in which my wife, Tamsen Granger, abandoned me, and I was on my own, because, tell them your reason. You were away because...
First of all, just let me say, is this part of the nostalgia theme
we're
here?
We're getting
the throwback, man cannot survive without his wife thing?
First of all,
Dan,
I did survive.
I think the modern man is able to fend for himself.
I thrived. I was good.
All right.
But explain your...
Please. One would think that I wait on you hand and foot.
No, that's not true.
Oops. Yes, I do. Sorry, not sorry.
You were away.
I was away. I was down in Georgia visiting my mother, helping to celebrate her 94th birthday.
Is it 94
Happy
really?
Birthday,
94?
Viv. Yes.
Wow.
And we had cake. We dined out. We had a little ladies' luncheon. We did jigsaw puzzles. Much fun.
How did you tear yourself away? How did you manage to leave?
I flew. I flew out of Trenton Airport. I'm telling you, I travel in style.
It is a little downscale, but it's convenient. Convenient, right?
Right.
Yeah, the most convenient. But anyway, I'm glad you're back. Welcome back. And, nostalgia, as you mentioned. I don't know why, but it struck me everything I'm reading this week is about nostalgia. And, of course, number one in the hearts and minds of many is the New York Metropolitan Baseball team, the Mets. The Mets who are unspeakably bad. The Mets who could barely draw flies. The Mets whose fans have given up on them, and for very good reason, very early in the season, were able to draw a capacity crowd yesterday. How did they do that, you ask? They did that by celebrating the 50th anniversary of the 1969 world champion Met baseball team.
The good old days.
And that's what brought people
when men were men.
Well, I don't know about men, but the Mets were a classic worst to first. They had spent their entire existence from 1962 up until 1969 as a cellar-dwelling team, and one would have thought prospects were low entering the 1969 season, but they had Tom Terrific, namely Tom Seaver, heading the pitching staff, and a few other luminaries, including Nolan Ryan. Both Seaver and Ryan ultimately would be in the Hall of Fame. And a couple of pretty good ball players besides. None great, but pretty good.
So you're saying that that's why the Mets are back in the cellar today? Because they're nostalgic for those old cellar-dwelling days?
No. There's no reason why they're back in the cellar today. But it is instructive that so many people would come out with a full-throated response to the Mets based on this team 50 years ago, who they see in an idealized light. And these guys can basically do no wrong. They weren't extraordinary ball players, but it was a great story. And they are celebrated and continue to be celebrated 50 years later. 50 years later is a long time. It was a huge deal in New York at the time in 1969, a bigger deal than I can think of anything else happening in New York City in the last 50, 60 years, honestly. Big parade and everything. I mean, look, when John Glenn went down the Canyon of Heroes, having circled the globe, the first astronaut to orbit the globe 3 times, if I recall correctly, it was a pretty good parade. But when the Mets won in 1969, that was a parade.
And yet, little Tammy Granger, blissfully unaware that there was even a World Series that year.
Listen, I don't want to cast any stones, but little Tammy Granger was in her own little world, I think. Not really on top of things. But in any event, so that
I know you enjoyed hearing from Cleon Jones.
Cleon Jones, the leading hitter at the time. And, a lot of these fellows were overshadowed at the time by Tom Seaver, who was the leader of the team, both on the field and, frankly, in the clubhouse, dealing with the press. He was the voice of the team. And sadly, Seaver is suffering from dementia now. He was not able to attend the ceremonies. But you hear from some other folks. Of course, many have passed away. But you have 10 or 12 of the core players. And they're speaking out in a way they didn't always in the past.
Well, telling anecdotes you haven't heard before. So
telling great stories.
I know you enjoyed that.
Yeah. I mean, even I picked up something... It was funny. They had the broadcast team of Ron Darling and Keith Hernandez are from a different World Series winning team in 1986, but they were saying they were in tears watching this. They were in tears. And they're saying they don't even understand why they're reacting this way. They have no link. They didn't follow. They're too young for the 1969 Mets, except they're the only other championship team, so they feel some kind of link.
Bond, yeah.
Yeah. And they had some quote from Ron Swoboda, who was a player then, and they interviewed him. And Swoboda is a sportscaster in New Orleans. And he said, I live in New Orleans. It's very nice. They have parades all the time, but they're Mardi Gras, and I'm not in that one. The one I was in was the one in New York. And what I remember was that just around the time we won, Fred Chiro was the coach of the Philadelphia Flyers hockey team. He said to them famously before they played the seventh game, "Win this game, guys, and you will walk forward together forever." And that's what I told the guys. And we won. So it was a big deal. So nostalgia is powerful, but it also manifests itself in a lot of very odd ways, commercial ways, that are hard to figure. And I pointed out to you this restaurant review that I just saw this week, which is very much about the power of nostalgia and with a different slant.
Right. TAK Room.
Mm-hmm.
The new fancy schmancy restaurant.
Fancy schmancy.
Fancy schmancy restaurant in Hudson Yards. Opened by Thomas Keller. Thomas Keller of French Laundry renown, and other fabulous restaurants all over the place. So, here we go with this place. The headline, I guess, in the New York Times review was Thomas Keller brings country club cuisine to New York City.
Yeah. Which is not positive. And the feel of the review, in the first three paragraphs explicitly, was not positive. And I thought the review was going to be a pan. And then I looked at the end and I saw two stores and I said, I don't know where this is going. And it was weird.
Well, and I saw another review had a headline or a discussion of the decor, and it said it looks like a millionaire's hangout in an old New Yorker cartoon.
Right.
And you get the feeling that's the aspiration here.
I bet it is.
Kind of create that back in the day 3 martini lunch ambiance.
But what's confounding is, and I guess the reviewer is Pete Wells. On the one hand, he's objecting to this throwback approach, and which he finds really off-putting, maybe more so than I can understand. And on the other hand, he's conceding that a lot of the food is super.
Yes, although he does say that it's the effort is so determined to be timeless that it seems clueless.
Well, yeah, but
it's the food of the 3 martini lunch, the steakhouse, the 21 Club, Dover sole, iceberg lettuce, prime rib, oysters, Rockefeller.
Yes, yeah, but my point is when he hones.
But he says,
yeah, what?
This is the quote you want.
Yeah,
it's the most refined, meticulous country club food you've ever had.
No, that's not even the quote I want. Refined and meticulous doesn't capture it. There are some things in the review when he talks about the chocolate cake, when he talks about the homemade potato chips or whatever. He's just saying this stuff is fabulous. Am I wrong about that?
Well, it says at a certain point he says, "Here comes a French onion dip, surrounded by newly fried potato chips that are dark without a hint of charring." Okay, this is, I don't know if you're supposed to say tack room, in one extremely crunchy, lusciously creamy bite, an hors d'oeuvre from the age of Naugahyde and polyester, transformed into something so good and pure, it's beyond reproach.
Right.
Then he goes on to say, the Parker House rolls. Got that? Parker House rolls are gravity-defying orbs served with soft, cultured butter that in the evening's best magic trick rises from a custom-made dish in 6 identical ridged curls like shrimp performing a Buzzley Berkeley routine.
Right. What does he say about the chocolate cake?
I'm not even going to read that. It's not as exciting as you
All right.
remember.
Okay. But he's going crazy about this stuff. Yeah. Well, see, there are two things going on here. First of all, I don't know. I would fault the review because it's supposed to be the quality of the food, and he can't go over the politics of it. But beyond that, he's onto something when he's really identifying that they're presenting an idealized version of the past. That the menu are droopy and unimaginative and unexciting because those foods were unimaginative and unexciting, but they're being presented in a way that's better than the past. That's why it's an idealized version of the past.
Right. Well, the Carbone...
It's not the real past.
The restaurant Carbone, those guys were doing that with red sauce Italian,
right.
red sauce American Italian
right.
food a few years ago. And then, in fact, same group reworking the Four Seasons, the pool room and the grill.
Right.
Doing all classic stuff, but taking it up a notch.
Right, but the marketing angle is that people have in their heads this idealized view of the good old days, and it was great, wasn't that great, and now they get to go back to it, and it is great, even though the good old days weren't so great, but it kind of restores in an odd, confusing way.
Well, they get to participate in it. They're not going back to it. They were never there. Okay?
Well, that
this was
may be.
a long, long time ago, and it was other millionaires. But now you can sort of reenact the 1% days of yore. But, I mean, it is a little crazy. Recreating things like French onion dip.
Well, listen to this.
Please.
This is the same thing. This is Cars, right? 2 articles this week, one in the Journal, one in the Times. The one in the Times says young buyers redefine vintage. And you're familiar with classic car collectors having cars that are 80, 90 years old. They say, no. The cars they're popular, the 1980s models, the 1990s models. Why is that? Here's the quote. They say this is from this fellow who follows the so-called new generation of car restoring, a fellow named Hemmings. He says that to some of us, these cars in the 80s, 90s, and 2000s seem like used cars, while to others, they're the stuff childhood dreams were made of. That's exactly what you're talking about.
Right.
These guys didn't have these cars, and now they have the money, and now they're going to get those cars from the 90s and restore them to something better than they ever were.
I guess really the 66 Dodge Dart never hit any of these nostalgia waves.
No. But you know what these are? These are often SUVs. They have a fellow here has a Land Rover Defender, and you'll respond to this because your brother did something like this. He bought it just so he could restore it with his son, so they could have a father-son experience restoring cars.
Right. And
his son has a forward-looking view of the situation. When asked about it, he says, well, my girlfriend likes it, so there you go. That's a reason to do it. But the Wall Street Journal article really does the Times one better. It's about, they call it the $300,000 nostalgia trip, and it's an article by Dan Neal. And
yes, your man crush.
Yes.
Your favorite writer.
Yes. And but it's picking up on the same theme. Here's the quote. There is a big difference between the romantic mind's eye image of your dream car and the archaic reality. So what's the business here? The business is that these folks are taking these cars, the ones we're talking about, the SUVs in the 1990s, and restoring them with engines and other parts that are like steroid versions of what they had before. So here's the way Neil describes it. Here comes the thunder, an all-American 6.2-liter, 430 horsepower aluminum V8, hooked to a GM gas transmission, Atlas II transfer case, and Dana 6 rear Dana 44 front axles, with optional locking differentials and Icon spec Brembo brakes, sitting athwart a custom coilover suspension, Fox Racing dampers, and eye-back coils attached to a custom frame. The Icon FJ has wheel articulation of 12 inches. Take it from a car person, Earthlings. It's built. And the way he sums it up is this way. He says, these are more than SUVs, more than vintage off-roaders. These are fantasy utility vehicles, towering Visigoths 100 times better and badder than ever they were in real life. That's right, folks. FUVs. So, there you go.
Well, they also mentioned that some of them they have reworked into being electric.
That's true, too.
Cars.
Yes.
But these sound like basically like those old hot rods that you used to see like Model Ts souped up.
Yeah, it does sound like that.
Engine,
it does sound like that. But it's also made to very high, all high specs, like Mercedes-Benz specs all the way around. When they have a convertible, they use Mercedes-Benz covers, and that's why they cost a fortune. But it's the same idea. So there's an article I was reading, not an article, a book I read recently, by a fellow named Yuval Levin, called The Fractured Republic, and it's about really about political economy and politics, generally speaking, what's going on in the country and other countries and things like that. But one of the things he identifies as one of the most important forces in politics is nostalgia. That you have a lot of folks, could be in both parties really, advocating for a past that they vaguely recall. Weren't things great in the 50s? Weren't things great in the early 60s? Everybody had jobs. Everybody knew their neighbors. Everybody, loved America. There was no strife, whatever. So that reality never occurred. It never existed. And yet it drives policy because people... The imagined reality drives policy. Yeah. People say, why can't we return to that? Let's get rid of these new things and go back to that.
Well, and that never existed. Does that include like the really ancient, like let's get back to the, the glory days of the founding fathers and things like that? Sometimes. Or is that too distant?
No, sometimes it does. When people talk about the Constitution, it is what they're talking about. Mm-hmm. Part of it is people read the Constitution. Part of it is a nostalgic vision, a fantasy of what the Constitution is and the magic associated with it. So it's not entirely wrong. Mm-hmm. But nostalgia is powerful, and frankly, it's not entirely positive, right? Because it's misleading. It gives you less than a clear-eyed view of what you're actually dealing with.
Right. Well, the problem is that it's nostalgia for something, as you've said, that didn't exist. So that's tricky. Okay, so you kind of walked all over my...
I forgot. Yeah, no, this is right in there. This
is in there. An article by Michelle Slatala in the Wall Street Journal, Why Such a Reaction to My Beautiful Laundry Line. This is stupidity.
Yeah, I know. Really this is dumb.
Okay, I have always had a laundry line.
Yeah.
And I don't dry everything outdoors. But I do dry things on the line, and I don't find it a big deal. Right. Although in some places you're not allowed to put out your laundry in your yard.
Well, but isn't
the homeowners associations have rules against it or whatever, and it's considered an embarrassment. Now, what this woman does,
right?
Okay, and she's just being, she's just being a provocateur.
Right.
She puts her laundry line in the front yard.
Yeah, that's what's tricky about it.
No one does that.
Right.
Who does that?
Right, and she pretends...
You're only doing that if you're trying to, antagonize people or make a point.
Right.
Not because you're trying to dry your laundry in a efficient, economical, and environmentally safe way.
Right.
So that pisses me off, that she's just doing that to make her point. And what does she do? She goes out there in the front yard, hangs her husband's underwear on the line, and waits for reactions.
But here's her excuse for that. Okay, first of all, the reason the article is silly is she makes it seem as if the issue is whether you should hang your stuff on the line, when the issue is should you hang it in your front yard versus your backyard, and she's got a big backyard. But secondly, she does hark back in a nostalgic way to years ago when everybody got to know their neighbors because their lines were very close together and they were right on top of each other and they would talk while they hung their laundry.
She's talking about those old New York pictures of the tenements where you had to pull the lines across, between the alleys.
And you had to cooperate and stuff like that. And she pretends to be recreating that.
And aren't the lines beautiful with the sheets floating in the air?
The boxers in the breeze, right?
Yeah. I mean, they can be beautiful. I love a laundry line, but, everyone she talks to, and she says, my neighbors haven't mentioned it. And they say, well, you have very polite neighbors, which is probably true.
Yeah.
We're all civilized, and you all know she's doing it to get a rise out of you, so you're not going to comment. But the second question, everyone says, you don't have,
a backyard.
You don't have a backyard.
And of course, it turns out, of course, she does have a backyard.
And so she puts up a new line in the backyard. Her husband promptly jogs out with her underwear, hangs it on the line, and she has to admit she's glad her neighbors couldn't see it.
Yeah. All right. Well, good. So in any event, you had a story about a road trip, which I kind of skimmed over, and
we'll talk about nostalgia.
Yeah.
I mean, this is an article by Jeff Gwynne, who, of course, cleverly has written a book, The Vagabonds, the story of Henry Ford and Thomas Edison's 10-year road trip. And it's got some charming pictures of Henry Ford, Thomas Edison, who else? Harvey Firestone.
Yeah, the tire guy.
And naturalist and author John Burroughs. Now, the Model T, the economical Model T, comes out in 1908. And, it's great. People are buying them. Of course, there aren't that many roads.
Right.
And a lot of infrastructure has to come along to really make this all work. And one of the things that helps that is that starting in 1914, Henry Ford organizes road trips with his buddies, the aforementioned. And they set off, and it's all very romantic. Not a razor in the party. No one's going to shave. They're just steer by the sun and the compass only, just on a whim, head out together, and often dining on fresh fish they caught themselves with a bent hook and a birch limb rod.
Which turns out to be...
Well, I mean, and all these trips, and these trips happen over the course of about 10 years,
yeah.
And they are filmed. There's a film crew going along with them, hired by Henry Ford, and their adventures appear in, the newsreels, at the movie theaters, etc. And people are thrilled because these are gods, right? Thomas Edison, Henry Ford inventing these great things, making life so much more wonderful and exciting in the 20th century. So they're anxious to see what these guys are up to. And sure enough, within a couple of years, everybody wants to go on these road trips. So here's the funny thing. As you said, it was all, again, a fantasy. Right. It was a fantasy. They had a huge staff, going along, cooking the food, bringing food along in a refrigerated truck, and providing them with freshly ironed linens and clothing every morning. Also, the guys themselves, they weren't traveling along in the Model T like the average Joe. They were traveling in spacious Packards and Lincolns driven by uniformed chauffeurs. So it was all kind of a fantasy, but it does the trick. In about 1920, they say there were about 10 million owners of cars at that point. And at least half of them apparently went out on road trips. And of course, you just do it when it came time to spend the night. You just pull over and park in somebody's field. Within 2 years later, there are 6,000 auto camps where people can have more conveniences, including one in Denver that could hold 2,000 cars and tents. And as a result of all this road trip travel and people setting off for longer distances than just running down to the store or whatever, gas stations start to crop up in the middle of nowhere. Also cafes, so that you don't have to depend on your bent pin and what was that? And rod to be providing your own dinner. So, I mean, this sounds like fun. At a certain point, these road trips, the publicized versions kind of dwindle in their allure. But before that stops, he actually ends up getting some presidents to go on trips with him.
Really?
Etc. Yeah. So it might be a fun read. Yeah. Also, Jeff Gwynne, The Vagabonds.
All right, and museum. You have a lot of museums.
I'm getting exhausted here.
Yeah, I'll help you out.
I do all the work in this family.
I'll jump in with museums.
Oh, yeah, right. Well, you actually gave me a little blurb about one thing that might be fun to do this summer is go to Greenwood Cemetery. It's always fun to go to the cemetery. And it's starting in the 1830s when they actually have purpose-built cemeteries, and Greenwood is a fantastic one in Brooklyn, New York. Fantastic monuments. It's a great, huge place to wander around, and you can go to their Twilight Tour, which starts at 7:30 and ends at 9:30, and has all kinds of great stories about the secret life of Leonard Bernstein, the shady dealings of Boss Tweed.
The Secret Life of Leonard Bernstein?
Yeah, I wonder what that is. So it sounds like it's a little more about the people than the actual monuments, but the monuments are worth a look as well. So go to the cemetery.
Yeah.
Have some fun.
I also was onto the Caravaggio thing that you're going to talk about.
It's not Caravaggio.
What is it? What is it? It's Caravaggio.
It's Caravaggio.
Caravaggio is very close.
Yeah, well, there was a big picture of Caravaggio. An alleged Caravaggio.
I'm betting that's real.
Found in an attic
I will
in
say,
France.
I've looked at the photograph. It looks real to me.
Okay, good to know.
Yeah.
And was found in an attic in France in 2014. And it is a painting of Judith, the Jewish widow.
Yeah. Somebody's getting
killing
their throat slashed.
Holofernes,
yeah, it's rough.
the Assyrian general, so that she can save her people with her elderly female servant cheering her on.
Yeah.
I've never really liked it. The thing about Caravaggio is it would seem to me to take a lot of strength to cut somebody's head off. And Caravaggio's Judiths never seem up to the task. Nonetheless, more knowledgeable experts than myself have decided this could indeed be a real Caravaggio, which would make it quite valuable. Everybody loves Caravaggio at the minute, tenebrism and all that. And so it was going up for auction. But before it could be auctioned, and there were estimates that it might go for as much as $110 million, a hedge fund manager guy, J. Tomlinson Hill, swoops in and buys it. We don't know the price, but the minimum bid was supposed to be around $34 million.
Yeah, I thought I read somewhere they thought he paid $40 million for it, but whatever.
Which is perhaps a bargain. He's on the board at the Met, so he has connections. So he must have reason to believe it's real. He's on a lot of boards. He's a big shot.
Yeah, all right.
But hopefully he'll loan it to the Met and other museums,
if it's not
so we can look for ourselves and see what Judith is up to.
My feeling is if it's not a Caravaggio, it's a Caravaggio, which is close enough.
Well, Caravaggio had a lot of imitators and followers. So, including my own personal favorite, Artemisia Gentileschi. But more about her another time.
Good.
Anyway, also going on in New York, there's a Maurice Sendak show.
Yeah, I'll tell you right off the bat, I'm not a big Maurice Sendak guy. That might surprise you.
At the Morgan Library.
But go ahead. Don't let me stop you.
Okay. Anyway, it's called The Drawing the Curtain, Maurice Sendak's designs for opera and ballet. Apparently he, this is what he says. 50 is a good time to either change careers or have a nervous breakdown. The new midlife career he took in the late 70s was as a designer for music theater. And so it has sketches, dioramas, etc. for various stage sets he did, for his own Where the Wild Things Are, for Mozart's Magic Flute, for The Cunning Little Vixen, and some other stuff. So that might be fun to see. Always fun to go to the Morgan Library in the 30s.
You like the Morgan, I know.
I do like the Morgan. It's a fun building. And it has some little smidges of the original library.
They charge money to get into the Morgan or not?
They absolutely do.
Okay.
Well, worth it.
All right.
And but another thing to do if you're not into Sendak is go see the Batman comics illustrations at the Society of Illustrators. Now that's not far from you. That's on East 63rd Street.
Really?
So you could toddle over there, and they have 80 years of illustrations from Batman comics, including one of the very first covers, the original art for one of the early covers, number 11, 1942, which sold like 10 years ago for about $200,000. But anyway, that might be fun. Illustrations are always fun to look at. There's also a new museum in town, the Poster House. This is down in Chelsea on West 23rd Street. And it's just opening, so they don't have all their stuff yet. But they are having an exhibition of Alphonse Mucha posters. You remember the fabulous Sarah Barnhart poster. And he kind of comes alive, makes his mark, becomes famous by doing her.
That's the one they have the Hamlet poster in there. I think.
I don't know if they have Hamlet. I can see Medea, Tosca.
Yeah, no, I think I saw Hamlet in the article, but yeah.
And you know the famous Job, the cigarette advertisements. A lot of his stuff was to really. Brought miscellaneous products into a very seductive and delightful renown. And then, of course, you remember who one of the great collectors of Alphonse Mucha posters is.
Yes, Ivan Lendl.
The tennis player.
Yes, the tennis player, the great tennis champion, the Czech tennis champion of some years ago. So
lots to do in New York if you're stuck there and can't get to the beach.
Yeah. Well, look, we're looking straight at the July 4th holiday coming up. So I'm having a 4-day weekend. So the last article I had, I think it's the last article, was something which, from the headline, I wasn't that excited, but as I read it, my interest increased. Which career is best for you? The clues lie in your college sport. The traits that made athletes successful on the field can indicate the jobs for which they'd be best suited.
So this must be all about women's ice hockey.
I thought it'd be about.
Is that the allure?
I thought it'd be about crew, honestly. But then you read it, and you're reading, and they go on in the same way. Some jobs have a reputation for drawing athletes of this type or that type, and then immediately it says. After saying, as recent graduates hit the job market, traits that made them successful as athletes can point to promising career paths, it says, quote, water polo players. The first sport they mentioned, water polo players, for instance, may thrive in tech marketing because both environments prize fast-moving teamwork. Then they take a little divergence. They contrast that with wrestlers who compete as individuals and aren't necessarily the greatest teammates in the world. They talk about the precision required in sports like baseball and diving, which they say...
What are wrestlers supposed to do?
Wrestlers may make great solo-focused salesmen.
Okay.
That's lonely.
All right.
And the precision required to succeed in sports like baseball and diving can help those athletes succeed at accounting. Accounting. Yes, if you're a successful driver, you might be an accountant. But then the article immediately...
You think Cespedes is going to do that next? If this whole baseball thing continues not to work out?
If his ankle heals. So then they immediately pivot back to water polo players, and the article turns out to be primarily about water polo players. They're talking with a guy who's the chief marketing officer of a company called Nextiva, a business telecom provider based in Scottsdale. He says, look, I love hiring water polo players. This is a quote. I won't discriminate against a golfer or a sprinter, but I find that the more collaborative the sport, the better fit they'll be in a marketing team. And then he goes on to talk about his actual experiences. He hired an Arizona State water polo player without thinking much about it. The guy was fantastic. He ended up bringing on the whole team from Arizona State.
Well, not quite the whole team.
The whole team.
But, a lot of them.
Including the mascot, if I recall correctly.
In water polo, you won't succeed if you hold the ball, he says. They're always passing, and there's a flow to the game which translates to the flow of work. You can't get anything done on your own in marketing either. Well, I have seen water polo games where there was not a lot of
but those guys
passing
they're terrible at marketing. Look, we only mention this because we happen to be very close to a lot of very prominent water polo players
and prominent
tech salesman.
Right.
So, look, this is a shout out to you guys. You know who you are. I won't mention names.
I think we should have done research about the author here. Smells like a former water polo player to me.
Maybe.
Nah,
Hillary Patkowitz. So we'll look her up. But the point is, as I've always suspected, the secret to success later on, particularly in tech marketing, is water polo. So you guys know you are, and take the lead from that. So until then, next week, again, short week this week, and then there's July 4th weekend.
Oh, that's true.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
time to start grilling those dogs.
We'll get ready. We'll stock up. But,
all right, so this is Tamsen Granger.
And Dan Abuhoff.
And we'll be back again with Tamsen and Dan read the paper next week.
Thanks.